So here's another question. What's a phobia? Irrational fear, right? What are examples of phobias? Fear of snakes, fear of spiders, fear of heights, claustrophobia. About 15% of people are afraid of snakes. But there is something that Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman calls the universal human phobia. There is something that 98% of human beings have a phobia of. Can any of you guess what it is? 98% of people have a fear. This is actually a bigger fear than death, and I'll explain why. Public speaking, great answer. Public speaking is an excellent answer because the reason why people are afraid of public speaking is because of this other phobia. This other phobia is what causes people to be afraid of public speaking. Embarrass yourself. Very close. Very close. Around 98% of people have a phobia of human aggression directed at them. Interpersonal human aggression scares most people, and I'm going to explain how this is a bigger fear than death. Every year in America, tens of thousands of people die in car wrecks. Very, very tragic. But every day, millions of people casually drive without a worry or care in the world. Every year in America, hundreds of thousands of people die from the effects of smoking. Very, very tragic. But every day, millions of people casually smoke without a worry or care in the world, knowing the risk. But if there is one serial killer in a town, and that serial killer kills a few people, the whole town can go upside down. One mass shooting gets the whole country's attention, the whole country can go upside down. One terrorist attack in America kills 3,000 people, very tragic. The whole country goes upside down and dramatically alters our way of life. So 3,000 people die every couple months in car wrecks. Why do car wrecks not dramatically alter our way of life the way that terrorism does? Think about it. Is it really about control? Let me give you an example. Is it really about control? First of all, when you're driving, you don't really have control. You have control over your own vehicle, but you don't have control over the other drivers texting and driving, or driving drunk, or falling asleep at the wheel, or being distracted, or not paying attention. You only have control over your own vehicle. Now, you might say that, well, when you're driving, you have the illusion of control because you're holding the steering wheel, so you're not afraid. But think about riding in a taxi, right? Do most people have a phobia of riding in taxis where you have no control? Or think about this scenario. How many of you have been on a long road trip and been in the passenger seat and gone to sleep? Probably everybody in the room, right? Do you have any fear of that? Do you realize how dangerous that is to be in the passenger seat and go to sleep when someone's driving? In the Army, you're not allowed to do that because when you're awake, you have an extra pair of eyes on the road and you can help keep the driver awake. But people don't have a fear of going to sleep as passengers when they're on a road trip. Most people don't. And think about that. You are completely giving up control. You are in the car, another person's driving, you go to sleep, you might never wake up, right? It's not really about control. There's something else going on, because if it was about control, most people would have a phobia of sleeping on a road trip, but most people do not. There's something else going on, and let's dig into what that could be. So I read an article in The Atlantic. That said that after September 11th until today, if you are an American citizen, you are as likely to be killed by your furniture as by a terrorist. You're as likely to die because your furniture falls on top of you than to be killed by a terrorist. So in 2010, globally, 15 American citizens were killed by terrorism. In 2011, globally, 17 American citizens were killed by terrorism. Now, I'm not trying to minimize that loss of life. That's a lot of lost life for those families. But I'm trying to show that if you look at these statistics, we're not likely to be killed by terrorism. If you were to multiply that number by 1,000, let's say that 1 year 15,000 American citizens were killed by terrorism, that would still be less than half the number of people killed every year in car wrecks. So what's going on? Well, here's another way to look at it. I'm going to give you two scenarios, and you tell me which scenario is more traumatizing. The first scenario, you're riding your bike, you fall off your bike, you break your leg. The second scenario, you're riding your bike, a group of people grab you, hold you down, and break your leg with a baseball bat. Which is more traumatic? the second one, right? But why? If you have the exact same physical injury, why does it matter how you broke your leg? Why does it matter? A human being did it to you. Think about a natural disaster. You have no control when there's a natural disaster. Earthquake, hurricane, tornado, wildfire. You feel helpless. What's worse, being a black family in the South and having your house burned down by a wildfire, or being a black family in the South and having your house burned down by the KKK? Which is more traumatic? It's that a human being did it to you. Now, we are so vulnerable to human-induced trauma. We are so vulnerable to human-induced trauma that a human being does not even have to physically touch you to traumatize you. A human being can betray you. They can humiliate you. They can make fun of you, verbally abuse you, bully you. They can call you a racial slur. They can spit in your face. They can spread malicious gossip about you. They can shun you. That is how vulnerable we are to human-induced trauma. I know many people who would rather break their leg in an accident than be betrayed by those closest to them. I know many people who would rather break their leg in an accident than be publicly humiliated. So we have this fear of human aggression because it's very hard to get over. Humiliation, betrayal, verbal abuse, bullying, let alone physical attack, malicious physical attack. You have to go through that whole process of forgiveness, which can be a lifelong journey. Now, again, with terrorism, with mass shootings, right, there is a human being intent on destruction, a different psychological dynamic than a natural disaster or other causes of injury and death. Now, this is why terrorism is so dangerous. This is why terrorism is truly so dangerous. The reason why terrorism is so dangerous is because of how we react to it. If Al-Qaeda would have said they want us to spy on our own people and torture and betray our own values and bankrupt our economy partly through war spending, we would have never done that, but by attacking us, we willingly do that. Now, this is why people are afraid of public speaking. Because in the back of your mind, the worst case scenario is, what if I say the wrong thing and the audience becomes aggressive toward me? What if they laugh at me, or humiliate me, or embarrass me, or make fun of me, or judge me, right? If you're talking with your friends, you probably don't have that fear, but when you're talking with strangers, what are these people going to do, right? And it is an irrational fear. Now, this is why people on both sides of the gun control debate are so emotional. They're both being influenced by this phobia, and the people on both sides of the gun control debate actually have common ground. So if you were to ask an anti-gun control person, I know many anti-gun control people, if you were to ask an anti-gun control person, why should you be allowed to have a gun? Many of them will say, I don't want a crazy person to shoot me and my family. If you were to ask a pro-gun control person, why should we restrict guns? Many of them will say, I don't want a crazy person to shoot me and my family. They have the same fear, but they respond to the fear differently. The anti-gun control person says, own a gun. The pro-gun control person says, restrict guns. So we have this fear of humans hurting us, betraying us, humiliating us, verbally abusing us, physically abusing us. This is why people admire civil rights protesters and soldiers, because most people don't want to go into that situation and get beaten up and killed. So when you look at a soldier, when you look at a civil rights protester, or you look at Gandhi's movement, you go, wow, that takes a lot of courage, because most people do not want to go into a situation where they're dealing with lethal human aggression. Here's another question. What does war do to the human mind? What does prolonged exposure to war do to the human brain? Causes trauma, exactly, causes trauma. But here's the thing. If human beings are naturally violent, why would war traumatize the human brain? If human beings were naturally violent, wouldn't people go to war and become more mentally healthy? But the opposite happens, right? If you raise a child in a peaceful, loving environment, that is good for the human brain, that is good for human development. Scientific fact. If you raise a child in a violent, abusive environment, that is not good for the human brain, that is not good for human development. Scientific fact. But if we were naturally violent, why wouldn't the opposite be true? So the Army did a study in World War II. In World War II, there were two Army medical doctors, Swank and Marchand. And they did a study that found that after 60 days of sustained day-and-night combat, 98% of soldiers suffer psychiatric trauma. After 60 days of sustained day and night combat, 98% of soldiers suffer psychiatric trauma. But 2% of soldiers can be exposed to war for long periods of time and kill and kill and kill and never go insane. So why is that 2% different? Why can 2% of soldiers be exposed to war for long periods of time and never go insane, and why can the other 98% not do that? According to the study, the reason why 2% of soldiers are never driven insane by war is because they were already insane before they went to war. According to the study, that 2% was composed primarily of aggressive psychopaths. But if we were naturally violent, why wouldn't you have the opposite proportion? So here's the thing that we have to understand about violence and trauma. In all of human history, in all of recorded human history, there has never been a single recorded instance, not one recorded instance of a human being becoming traumatized from receiving a genuine act of kindness. Never before happened. But if you receive an act of violence against your will, it can traumatize you, maybe severely. And you might say, well, that's because violence causes physical injury. But in all of human history, there's never been a single recorded instance of a human being becoming traumatized from inflicting a genuine act of kindness. But many, many people become traumatized from inflicting violence, even if they receive no physical injury in the process. So I'm going to talk about how people can be traumatized from inflicting violence. Imagine if I had you spend an entire day with a 5-year-old girl. And your mission during this day is to get to know this 5-year-old girl as well as possible. Find out, what does she want to be when she grows up? Does she have a pet? What's your pet's name? What's her family like? What are her interests? What's her favorite game? And then go play her favorite game. Go eat ice cream. Go to the park. Spend the whole day getting to know this 5-year-old girl as well as possible. Now, at the end of this day, I want you to look the 5-year-old girl in the eyes, and without blinking or turning your head, I want you to take a hammer and bash her skull in. Around 98% of the human population will become traumatized from inflicting that intimate act of violence. But what if you know nothing about the girl? What if you know nothing about her? You don't spend the entire day with her. The percentage of people traumatized will decrease slightly. What if you never see her face? What if you hit her in the back of the head with a hammer? The percentage of people traumatized will decrease slightly. What if you don't use a hammer? What if you shoot her with a rifle at 300 yards? The percentage of people traumatized will decrease. What if you believe she's evil, and you believe her family's evil, and you believe she and her family are subhuman, and you believe they want to kill your family? Percentage of people traumatized goes way down. What if you drop bombs at 10,000 feet? Percentage of people traumatized goes way down. So the war system is able to create all these forms of distance that reduces the percentage of people traumatized.